How we doing, Bear Nation? I'm your host, Rob Napoli, and we are back again for another episode of the Bear Necessities Podcast. And today's a really fun one. We have a really amazing guest, Howard Behar, who was the president of Starbucks for I don't know, a couple of decades. He wrote the book. It's more about coffee, the magic cup. He's done a lot of work as a social impact conscious person. And I'm really excited to chat with you about building culture. So, Howard, thank you for joining the show today, my friend.
Rob, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I know you're out on the West Coast. I'm out on the East Coast. Did you get up and do a little fishing this morning, or is the
No,
season
I
kind of
didn't do any
passing?
fishing this morning, but it is a beautiful day. I happened to be down in Seattle this morning,
Okay.
and it was absolutely the weather's just been incredible.
I love it. It's the best time of the year as we're recording
Yeah,
this, in October,
yeah,
as we head into the fall. It's my favorite season, right? Like October, November, it's my favorite. Also, I'm a big guy, so if I don't have to, walk outside and sweat every day in New York City, I'm
right,
happy.
right. It's
Although I
good.
am jealous because you get to be in nature, and I love getting out to hike. So I'm excited to have you on, and we got connected through a friend of ours, Stoyan, and I remember when we sat down and chatted. I was giddy and over the moon. Um, as when I was doing a master's degree, we did a case study on Starbucks, but it wasn't just the normal case study that you think of Howard Schultz and his experience building the company. We looked at it from a lens of building culture, and that's something that you had a big impact in with the servant leadership. So tell me, just quickly, kind of high level, what was when you look back at Starbucks as the president of Starbucks? What do you think the biggest impact you made was there?
I think it was servant leadership, without a question, and the idea that we weren't in the coffee business serving people, but we're in the people business serving coffee.
And how did
And
that mindset and how was that shift in mindset or that philosophy born? Was that a day one thing? Was
it
that over
wasn't.
time?
It was. I mean, I saw it early on because I'm a people guy, and I just looked and said, if there was ever a business that is about people, it's the coffee business. Because, like right now, I'm having a cup of coffee as I'm talking to you. I'd go sit in the store, have a cup of coffee with a conversation, reading a newspaper. It's always about people. And coffee is kind of the grease of life. I think of it at least that way. So, but at the early days of all entrepreneurial organizations, they think they're in that whatever the business they're selling, whatever service or product they're selling, they think that's their business. But the minute they hire one person, they're no longer in that business. Now they're in the people business. And so I kept driving that and I was relentless about it. And, I just believe in it. I believe that all organizations are about people. I mean, anytime you think they're not, think again.
I love that. And to that point, right? The minute you start hiring your first person, it's about people. But I also think the minute you start a business, even if you're a solo entrepreneur, it's about people and building a culture, right?
Yeah,
And I
sure.
get asked all the time because as you and I were talking pre-show, I do a lot of training on how to attract and retain Gen Z and millennial
Yeah.
talent. And I get asked by entrepreneurs and companies later, it's like, oh, we need to build culture. And it's like, what do you need? You need to build. You build culture from day one. So having this servant leadership background and building that, what would you kind of advise a new owner, business owner, or a new entrepreneur and just say, hey, you're starting culture from day one? How do they think about that? What is the Howard Bahar blueprint to thinking about building culture long term?
Well, first of all, you need to know who you are because you can't fake it. Culture is a reflection of the leaders of the organization in one way or another, and not what they say, but rather what they do. And you have to be conscious of that all the time. What is it you want? What kind of place do you want your people to work in? What kind of place do you want to work in? What kind of communications do you want to have with each other? What is it, a place of kindness and love, or it is this performance driven culture where everybody's pounding on each other? And I'm not here to tell you what's right or wrong. I know what I like and what works for me and what I've tried to do, but you need to be aware and thoughtful about it. And I always think that every leader should define their 8 to 10 core values as a beginning. And those 8 to 10 core values should influence the culture in the organization. And then of course the organization have it should have its guiding principles or 8 to 10 core values, and they have to overlap. You can't have conflicting ones, otherwise it's not doesn't work. So leaders have to be aware and conscious about it. And if that old adage, if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. Be intentional about your culture.
Yeah, I absolutely
That's
love that,
culture
and
is
I
an
think
interesting word. Every company has every organization. Families have cultures. Businesses have cultures. Nonprofits have cultures. Schools have cultures. I always say I have a culture of one. Me, and I have my own culture. So to speak, and we all have it, and we all live it. The question is it the one we want to do?
absolutely, and I think the important piece of that is one, you have to have your own kind of set of core beliefs and values, right?
Right.
And
Yes.
those are kind of your personal brand, and then your professional brand should be an evolution of that. And there's that overlap, as you were saying, and it's really important to lay these out. And I know that you have a really cool thing that you do. It's called Howard in 50 words, which lays that
Right.
out. Walk us through
Right.
how you got it to 50 words. I don't know if I could do 50 words about me,
Well,
keeping it short.
it's it takes a lot of work. Everybody thinks it's easy. It's not. So I started with defining what my core values were. So you can go online, you can get a list of 300 words that represent human values. And it's easy to get it to 50. And there's probably 50 or 100 words that would some way or another describe a little bit of you in some way. But getting it down to the real core ones, the 8 to 10, those are really important. And then what those 8 to 10 core values mean to you? How do they inform the actions and the decisions you make in your life? So you have to define them. Because otherwise, core values, like my first core value is honesty. It's just a word until it turns into action. What does it mean to me? What does honesty mean? Does that mean I never lie about anything? Does it mean I won't tell a white lie to somebody? What does it mean to me? And then having a personal mission statement, I think it's critical, or a BHAG, like Jim Collins calls it, something that drives you. That it gets you up in the morning, and you look at that and you say, "That's me. That's who I want to be." And it's an ever ending journey. My personal mission statement is every day I want to nurture and inspire the human spirit, beginning with myself first and then for others. And the reason why I say self first is because it's not selfish. It's that I've come to understand after living as long as I have that if you're not okay with you, very difficult to help anybody else. And then I have a paragraph that or words that describe how I want to live every day. I call them my 6 Ps. And so those 50 words really are how I live my life. Now, am I perfect? No. Do I do everything every day? No. But they are my guide.
Absolutely. And I love that because, like, for me, one of my kind of core values has always been be curious,
Yeah.
right? Because when I'm curious, I ask questions. And when I ask questions, I'm authentic. And when I'm authentic, I can be intentional about where I want to go from there.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
love the idea of curiosity. And one of my favorite quotes is Walt Disney is we keep moving forward, opening new doors and doing new things
Yeah.
because we're curious
Right.
and curiosity leads us
Right.
down new paths. And that's something that always stuck with me and from an early day. So I love that we have that. And I think that's really important for leaders because it's really easy to talk like a leader. It's really easy. If you look up leadership and management philosophies on
Yeah.
Google, you'll get 100 books written by people.
Right.
But I think what's different is, when you walk your talk, and that's something you talk about, and we talked
Yeah.
about pre-show. And I want to kind of get into this because when we think about Starbucks, and we talked about you wrote a book about this. It's more than just about the coffee, and what people focus. And I remember I graduated college in 2009, 2010, right after the financial collapse. I came
Yeah.
out. When I was in college, I played college football. I had long hair, earrings. I was a Catholic schoolboy, so I had to be clean. So the minute I went to college, I got tattoo, I got an earring, grew a beard, all those things. Then I got out into the working world again, and I was like, oh, they got to be clean and kind of get cleaned up. And so I did. I had the short hair, the short beard. I kept all the tattoos, under the sleeves. Now I'm
Yeah.
starting to build out because I
Yeah.
feel like everything is kind of growing back out. But I remember that one of the few places that I would walk into, and I was like, man, this makes me feel good because everyone there was their own person. That was a Starbucks. Everyone behind the counter owned their own look. They had so much flair. Everyone
Yeah.
was nice. Like, was that a day one build? Like, how did that happen where you encouraged everyone to be them in the store? Because I think that makes a big difference to the experience that people got in the early days, or early days back in the early 2000s and late 90s at Starbucks.
Well, I'd like to tell you we were perfect at that. I think that what we set out to do was have texture. That's the word I always like to use, is not to be slick. And that meant that people had to be who they were. We wanted our people to create real relationships with those human beings they were serving, not just, would you like a large order of fries with that today, but rather real conversation. And so that's what we try to drive. Now, in the early days, we had the earring issues. We had it was women could wear earrings, men couldn't. Then how many earrings can you wear? And then finally, you just kind of let it go, and you realize that the culture of the country is moving this way. But we restricted tattoos. We couldn't show the tattoos. We didn't want nose rings or lip rings, and things like that. What we didn't want was whatever you wanted to be. We didn't want that to get in the way of your conversation. We didn't want somebody to come in and look at your nose ring and say, "God, think that's all they thought about was the nose ring," right? And made some people uncomfortable. Now, today's world, it's changed a lot. They show their tattoos. It's just that door is long since opened, and you kind of let it go. And within reason, within some reason, you need to be clean, and all those kind of things. But other than that, I mean, we probably wouldn't hire anybody that had full facial tattoos, doesn't fit our business. It's not that there's anything wrong with those people. It's just that it becomes about them then.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think, you know, and I'm glad you kind of shared the whole "I wish we were perfect" at the beginning, but it was an evolution, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And the more that you realize that you let people be themselves, they bring their true character, and their true
yeah,
character is what you hired them for, anyways.
yeah,
And
exactly.
that always shows up and shows out when people are most comfortable in their own skin. And
Yeah,
so if you allow that to the workers are going to provide better service in any
yeah.
industry and things that you do. And obviously there's a limit to that, right? So everything within
Yeah, I mean,
reason.
there's some I don't know where that limit is. I don't know. I think it just keeps kind of moving. That limit just keeps moving. I still don't understand. I say God gave us these beautiful bodies, and then we want to cover them up, with stuff. But it's the nature of the beast today. People want to do that. Not new. It's thousands of years old.
So, you talk about a core philosophy of yours as honesty.
Yeah,
And, there's obviously a lot of things in your career that you've seen. What was one of the times that maybe walk us through an experience, whether it was a high point or a low point or a time of crisis, where you had to be honest, even at the detriment to yourself, and you had to kind of look in the mirror and be like, "I need to stick to who Howard is and make this decision." Do you have a few of those moments that are like in the top of mind?
yeah. Well, I've got one that really informed that honesty piece. And you're talking to a guy that barely got out of high school, had a couple of years of community college, and I finally got the opportunity to be president of a public company. And and I'm in the job 3 months, and I realized that we're a little bit in trouble, and I got to do something. So we had to figure out where we were going to cut back. We were going to have some layoffs. And so I got the team together and we all created a plan and which departments were going to have to lay off people, which ones weren't, and the whole 9 yards. And my administrative assistant typed it out, and the head of human resource took the plan, went to the copier, and made a copy for everybody, but she left the original in the copier.
Oh no.
This was on a Friday. By 8 o'clock Friday night, the phone was ringing off the hook. Somebody found it, and the drums beat throughout the company. And so, I didn't know what to do. I thought, oh man. So I got my team together again on Saturday morning. I said, here's what happened. What do you think we should do? And I went around the room, asked everybody their opinion, and the majority opinion was just deny it, just say it's just thoughts. We're not, we may or may not do. We don't know what we're going to do or anything like that. But we knew we were going to do it. All right. So my administrative assistant, her name was Lori Christmas. She just looked at me and tapped me on the shoulder. She said, Howard, only the truth sounds like the truth. Only the truth sounds like the truth. And I said, Lori, you're right. So I called a meeting on Monday morning and I laid out, here's what's happening. I was sorry that they had to find out, on Friday night on a copy, on the copy machine. But And one person stood up and said, "Thank you for telling us the truth. I may be one of the ones that gets laid off, but I'll support you in this process." And one by one, everybody stood up. And it was such a valuable lesson to me. When you share the truth with your people, they may be uncomfortable, they may be hurt, they may be sad, all those things, but they'll help for the most part because they respond to being treated as valued human beings and they respond to being told the truth.
They do, and I love that line. Only the truth sounds like the truth. And you know, we were kind of talking pre-show about retaining Gen Z and millennial talent. And one of the things that
Yeah,
I talk a lot about is in the way the world has changed and people working is they want to feel heard and they want to feel seen. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to use every idea. It doesn't mean that you're going to put them on big projects. But if you're honest with them and say, "Hey, here's what I need you for. Here's what I would love your opinion," and
yeah,
you make them feel heard and seen, and you're just honest with humans, like that's a big difference, and it
yeah,
makes a big difference in keeping your employees engaged, keeping your employees happy, and keeping your employees feel like they're a part of something bigger than
yeah.
themselves, which is what we're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. That's yeah, people want to have meaning in their lives. Whatever it is. It doesn't always come from their work. Sometimes it comes from other things, and their work is just a means to an end. But you spend a lot of time at work, and there should be some kind of meaning to it that's bigger than you. You know, I never thought that we were. I used to tell our baristas that they were social workers, and they had 10 seconds to determine where that person was in front of them. Do they just want a hot cup of coffee or do they want some conversation? And you had to respond in the way they wanted to be responded to. And that's not easy to do, to be aware of, because so often we're into ourselves, right? We come to work and all we can think about is that argument we just had with our significant other, or the traffic ticket we got, or we're going to see the Rolling Stones tonight, whatever it is. And we're kind of into ourselves instead of into those people. Yet we all want other people to be into us, right?
Yeah.
But we don't recognize it's tit for tat.
Yeah.
It's how it goes. If you're into somebody else, they're going to be into you.
Absolutely. That's something that I feel, I worked in food service my whole life, in high school and in college. And, I would always know when somebody, wanted to talk, when they didn't want to talk.
Yeah,
And it's a skill that takes a long time to learn. But if you get it right, it's quite nice because sometimes I go to a bar and I just want to be left alone and, watch TV. And sometimes I want to go and I go there because I want to have a two-way conversation with
yeah, I
somebody. And
wanna
it's
talk to
nice
the
that,
bartender. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and people, you can recognize it. You get so that those little antenna that you can't see that are in your head, if you tune in to others, you'll get there. I mean, if anybody in your audience is married or has a significant other that they live with, you can come home at night and your significant other doesn't have to say a word, and you know exactly where they are, what kind of day they've had, what you did that pissed them off, or what you did that made them happy. They don't have to say a word. You can just see it in their eyes. You can feel the energy.
Yeah, my my wife would definitely agree with that statement. I love it. I want to get back to this. One of the things that you mentioned, the biggest impact was bringing servant leadership to Starbucks, and that takes on a lot of um, shapes and forms. And we talk a lot about walking your talk.
Yeah,
And one thing that I always notice is that leadership, I mentioned this, there's a lot of books, there's a lot of thought leaders, people talking about this, and here's the playbook on doing this, and here's this, and it all sounds fine and good until shit hits the fan,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
when you're a leader and you're talking about servant leadership and you're talking about honest and you share that story about the layoffs, when things start going south and it's hard, that's when real leaders arise. And how have you taken lessons you've learned and had that internal conversation to then have that external conversation to make those tough decisions and to lead and manage in a time when things aren't going well?
I think it goes back to authenticity and honesty. You have to be authentic. You have to be vulnerable. You can't hide stuff. If you're under stress and you got high anxiety because something's going on in the organization that needs to be fixed, you can trust your people to share it with them. I mean, the goal is not to scare the hell out of them. The goal is to have them help you solve the problem. If I had a problem, I never thought I had to have the solutions. I think leaders get caught up in that. They think that that's what they're paid for. They're not paid for having solutions. They're paid for helping their teams come up with the solutions, right? I was the alchemist. I thought you get disparate ideas from your team about what we should do, and then you put it together, and that's the key. I think that we get caught up in it's like getting caught up in being a parent. You think you have to know everything. You don't.
Where do you think that came from though? Like, 'cause I agree. Like, as a leader, they think they have to know everything. They have to always be right. And that if you're vulnerable as a leader, that's a sign of weakness. But that's not true,
No,
right?
it's
Like, so
not.
where do we think that that mentality came from, and why? How do we go back away from that and go back to true servant leadership?
Well, I think it's nature of the beast, right? Like Ray Kroc used to say, turn your fear into faith. Unfortunately, most people can't turn their fear into faith. They turn their fear into anxiety. And and that's what happens. And people, when they get anxious, right, they look many people some people look to blame others. Some people don't want anybody to know that they're sweating. I had a guy that was a chairman of the board of a company that I worked to, and he basically says, "Don't let anybody see your emotions." That was impossible for me. I mean, it was like, everybody knew how I was feeling all the time, before I did sometimes, and so I think it's just nature of the beast. It's that fear factor of feeling like you're weak, like you should know, but you don't, and the ability to to acknowledge your strengths, acknowledge your weaknesses, acknowledge that you're not a perfect person.
Yeah. So when you think about, so I love this, right? So as a leader, I think it's really important to um, bring in people that do what you can't. You don't need to know everything. You need to bring in the right people. You talked about you being an alchemist.
Yeah.
So as you're building, Starbucks and some of the other companies that you've worked for and been on the boards of these companies, how have you kind of put that into the hiring process? So think about it. The reason why I'm asking is we have a lot of founders and entrepreneurs out there that always come to me and they're looking to hire like a CTO or a co-founder and give equity, and they jump into these. They don't really do a great job like having that conversation. So when you were hiring for leaders at
Yeah.
Starbucks, thinking about that servant leadership hat, how did you go about evaluating that talent and making sure you were bringing in or bringing up people internally that live by those values? What was the recruitment process like in that for you?
Well, I didn't recruit so much. I mean, I did recruit for skills sometimes. It depends on what the job was. Something if I knew about. If I was interviewing somebody to be in an accounting department, a VP of accounting, I'm not an accountant, so I let other people interview for skills. I interviewed for who they were as a human being. I interviewed for values because at the end of the day, if that counts first, you could have the best skills in accounting, but if you're an asshole, you don't belong with us. And so I focused on that. I would dive in. There were no yes or no answers in the questions I asked. I would ask questions like, "What do your parents like about you? What don't they like about you? If you have a brother or sister, what did they like about you? What didn't they like about you? What was the biggest human challenge you ever have? How did it get solved? When was a time that you wouldn't couldn't solve a relationship challenge? You know,
These are great questions.
yeah, and so I kept digging for that kind of stuff. I wanted dialogue. It wasn't so much the answer. I wanted to know if they could be truthful, if they could be authentic, and if they could be vulnerable. And I was looking for that. And so you hire the values first. That is number one. I don't care. The skill sets could be out of this world, right? Uh, if you could hit 60 home runs, or whatever the number is today. I guess you got to hit 63 today.
Yeah,
You know,
63
but
now in the American League.
but
74 if you want to beat Bonds, depending
yeah,
on
if you
who's
want to
working
be
on your
Bonds,
line.
but I don't count him. Okay, all right. So you have to. But at the end of the day, if you can't be a team player, right, then we don't need you.
Yeah. I love that you go back to this. Can they be authentic? Can they be truthful? Can they be vulnerable? And I think that's really That's a really big piece. For me, one of my other core values is authenticity, and I'm authentic to a fault at times. Where not too long ago, I was sending an email out, and it was to a lot of different people, and I forgot somebody. And when so I responded and I sent that, I forwarded the email on and said, "Hey, I really apologize. Somehow I missed putting you on this thread. I wanted to make sure that you have this information. I'll make sure to loop you in on all future communications moving
Yeah,
forward." And I had some of the other people like, "Oh, that's weird that you would do that way. You should have just like forwarded on so they thought they would be CC'd and like not call that out." And I was like, I know but I want to make them feel special by being authentic and saying, "Hey, I'm really sorry. You're going to be looped back in, so
yeah,
now you're kind of tied into everybody."
yeah,
And that was kind of a really big moment for me of just sometimes being authentic to a fault. But I'd rather take that any day,
yeah.
right?
I don't. You either are or you're not. Right? There's not halfway. It's not, well, sometimes I am and sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I tell a lie, sometimes I don't. People have to be able to depend you are who you are and in all situations. And that's it's hard. It's not easy. Look, it's not easy. We all have our fears, we all have our anxieties, and the key is learning to manage that stuff as best as you can.
Absolutely. And for me, in that example I used, the key learning lesson was, hey, sometimes I move. I've been in New York for 7 years, right? I move like a New Yorker. Sometimes I do things too fast. I have ADHD and OCD. Sometimes I just
Yeah,
move too fast for my own good.
yeah,
It's like, Rob, take a second to sit back, sit with
yeah,
it. Just
yeah,
take us, just let it breathe. Take a step away and then come back. If you just did that, you probably wouldn't have missed that email. And you would have noticed it. It would never have been
yeah,
an issue. But there's the are who you are, and there's always the learning lesson, and there's always that balance of, hey, this is who you are, that's amazing, here's where you can learn, here's how you grow from it, and here's how you move forward and continue to be the best version of yourself.
yeah,
And I think that's, a lot of us always pass the blame somewhere, and we're afraid to
yeah, yeah,
look in the mirror. And I think that the key lesson here is a good leader, servant leadership. You got to look in the mirror first. If you can't be truthful with yourself, how can you be truthful with other
yeah.
people?
I mean, we know when we have stepped over the bounds, we've got out of bounds. We don't like to acknowledge it, but you need to be able to do it. You need to be able to go home at night and feel uncomfortable. And then you got to clean up your mess.
Yes. Absolutely.
And that's
Then
the
you
most important thing. You got to own it and you got to apologize and that's okay. You know,
That's awesome. Howard, we covered a lot of ground here. And I really appreciated you kind of sharing your insights and some great insights and questions. Um, Anything that you're kind of doing or working on that you want to give a shout out to, or how do my listeners find you or
yeah.
learn more about
Well,
what you're
I
working
always
on?
give my phone number and my email address. So my phone number is 206-972-7776, and my email address is hb, that's my initials, at howardbehar.com. And I'll get back to anybody that reaches out to me. I don't Whatever the subject is, that's up to them. But it takes me a while sometimes. But yeah, but my mission in life is to nurture and inspire the human spirit. So if I can help anybody, I want to do that.
Well, I love that, and I love the mission, and I hope you keep spreading that mission. And I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me, and chop it up a little bit. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and
Hey,
thank
thanks.
you so much for being a part of Bear Nation and sharing your experience with us.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And Bear Nation, please, if you feel like compelled to reach out to Howard, do so. He is an amazing person. I know you won't regret it. And until next time, Bear Nation, stay well and rise up. Bear Nation, thanks for listening to the Bare Necessities of Entrepreneurship. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review.